before. Thank you. Okay. So Radical Women has members in many different unions, and we have been pushing for the labor movement for years to take up social issues that impact the most oppressed and exploited among us. The idea of a general strike is being discussed more in movements as a way to fight the Trump administration, and we know that a general strike is organized labor's most powerful weapon. So with that, I'm going to introduce Amy Gray Schlink, who is a union plumber in San Francisco. She is a founding member of Strength in Numbers, a grassroots rank and file group formed to fight management abuses at the San Francisco Water Department. She's a queer parent of twins living in Oakland, California. Take it away, Amy.
Right. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I'm obviously really excited to be here and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Um, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about the attacks that are coming down on all of us. We all see it and feel it, and we're anticipating the next cuts and takeaways. Maybe the Medicare cuts are, they're just the latest and, among the most egregious, but they're not the first and they're not the last way that our services and resources are being stolen. But if you look out the window or around the corner of your cubicle, or if you pop your head out of the trench that you're digging, that's my work. There's people everywhere that want to fight, and that's really important. We are not defeated. I think I might have noticed that on this Zoom today, it's not only women, and that is a good thing because we really want to talk about how working class leadership that is feminist is really crucial for every single oppressed group to make strides. So this meeting and this topic is for everybody. The reality is that we are fighting back, and I think in a lot of ways we're getting stronger and smarter. Workers are organizing, forming unions where there weren't any before. Amazon and Starbucks are two good examples, but the cannabis industry is organizing, and I can't remember where, but I read that a climbing gym even organized. So even small businesses, workers are understanding they need unions. Workers who were already organized are striking and voting down bad contracts, which is so important, and pushing unions to be involved in issues, far beyond just wages and contracts, and far beyond the scope of, what the country needs, all the way to issues of importance to our whole class. And, that's the working class that, we're all the 99%, we're all under attack by this one little ruling class tiny layer at the top. Now, the ruling class is international, and the multinational corporations, they certainly respect no borders, and so our working class fight back has to also be international. And in this, I think we've taken a huge and really long needed step. The worldwide opposition to the occupation and genocide in Gaza has really helped U.S. workers to truly see beyond borders. It's not so easy anymore to just wrap our anger or our fear in an American flag. And so, again, our class consciousness is really rising, and we are looking through an international lens. That's really an important thing that we've developed. We're on the move, and we're learning how to really unite each struggle. We're envisioning how to get this going on a massive scale. At least we're talking about it, and more than talking about it. Some are, already talking about it in unions and so forth. We have courage as working people, and audacity, and we have intelligence, and add to that at least compared to any other time in my lifetime, more regular folks are absolutely seeing that capitalism is the root of the problem. There's just really no other way to see it. The system will not reform itself. Also, what we have going for us is we still do technically have some damn rights, but the bosses are hoping they've, stifled them for long enough that we were going to forget to assert them. But when you take all this together and then think about, the integration of the labor movement with all the other movements, um, do I have these pages in the right order? I think I do. when you put, all that together, and the fact that the labor movement and all the other movements are joining, working class folks are really standing up. And it's not just on strictly labor issues. Again, Palestine against the bombing of Iran, for the right of working people in every corner of the globe to go wherever they need to be able to find work. There's lots of examples of rank and file unionists really, sometimes having to drag their bureaucratic leadership, sometimes not, but rank and filers fighting for these things. The Service Employees International Union has Purple for Palestine. sheet metal workers and laborers have fought for their unions to stand up to ICE. And again, these are mostly low paid women and people of color. They're rank and file workers. Um, so this meeting is about women. Why are women so key? And, simply put, women are the most oppressed within any oppressed group. We're the lowest paid. We face housing and healthcare insecurity. The second and third shift of caring for children and for elders makes us really precarious. And there's tons of industries, especially higher paid ones, that we still haven't really broken into, including construction. I think there's still only 2% women in construction, which is where I work. So our opportunities are slim. Obviously, then, for women of color and other doubly and triply oppressed, things are even worse. But because of this experience, it points to the leadership potential, and more than potential, it points to the consistent record of leadership that people have when they see so clearly the injustice and indignity and insult that's heaped on them and their children and families. So, for working class women of color and queer women and trans folks and immigrant women, there's really little illusion. The system is stacked against us. Trump can throw a few women in his cabinet, or even the Proud Boys can recruit a few people of color. But the presence of these individual opportunists really means nothing in the struggle for genuine liberation. I think it's really important and exciting to think historically and today. There are so many movements that have been started and led by women that really benefited everybody. And this has always been what, working women have always fought. I think about just the struggle for affirmative action. That was millions of women inside and outside of their unions, and others, but, who were fighting for this. And that benefited Black workers, it benefited women, it benefited a lot of sectors of society. Needless to say, it never went far enough, and we should be fighting to get it back and expand it. But that was a fight that was for everybody. Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer, these heroes in the civil rights movement fighting for jobs and economic survival for Black people, they physically countered the Democratic Party and formed the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. That was for everybody. Another one, as labor, I mean, the 8 hour day, Lucy Parsons Gonzalez helped found the International Workers of the World and, fought for she was a mover and shaker in the movement for the 8 hour day. And that, again, was obviously for everybody. And today, there's examples. And Sarah Nelson, who heads the flight attendants union, she's been leading the charge for unions to start organizing for a general strike. So there's tons of examples. I can't move on without, celebrating a couple of radical women examples that I've just been thinking about recently. In the 70s on the University of Washington campus, Radical Women was in the leadership of fighting with other low-paid staff to form the United Workers Union Independent, who had been totally ignored by the more conservative and more privileged layers of labor on campus. Another really important example is the United Construction Workers Association. These were African American men who were fighting to win construction jobs. And Radical Women was there fighting for affirmative action, fighting for Black folks to get these jobs. And they garnered solidarity in return for women workers to also be taken up. And UCWA took up the demand for women entering the trades. So I do want to say, of course, it's not that we need only women. Everybody who's in the crosshairs of these attacks that are happening, and they're happening because capitalism is crumbling and it's trying to save itself on our backs. Everybody needs to assert, their leadership, and hopefully all of us in solidarity with each other. But to put another way, kind of what I was saying earlier, if women's leadership and women's issues and feminism are left out, it's a detriment to everybody. And there really can be no inclusive and encompassing movement, like the fight for affirmative action, for example, without a feminist perspective. So for me, as a Radical Women member, this is really the first place I learned about labor. And this is definitely the first place I was taught to assert my own leadership. Na mentioned in the introduction, Strength in Numbers. That's a group of workers across unions that we founded at the San Francisco Water Department. It was 2 women of color and me, a queer woman, who work in a 95% male environment. And we founded SIN, we call it SIN, we're sinners, when my sister Plummer was killed in a totally preventable accident. And right after that, we quickly learned that all 300 workers across 10 or 15 different departments were all feeling attacked and abused by management. And now there was a spark and we were ready to move. And so we formed around safety and racist and sexist hiring practices and other management abuses. During COVID, my own union chose not to support a petition to make us safer that we put together. But that didn't stop us, and it did expose that our undemocratically elected old boys leadership were traitors, just as they are. So SIN became a multiracial, multigender group, and our workplace just needed some leadership to get it started. So leave it to women of color and queer folks. Another really cool example of where I learned myself about how effective women's leadership is our most recent contract fight at the city of San Francisco. Every union sold us out, and they didn't even have the will to fight to try to get a contract that would keep up with inflation after we already had been losing due to years of inflation. So we got a few people together, wrote up a leaflet, and organized a no vote. And we didn't win, but this was literally the first no vote campaign I had ever seen at the city of San Francisco in 20 years. And it planted a lot of seeds, and that we have the right to fight, even if our elected union officials won't. And we went to city buildings and handed out leaflets, and I was so it was a shot in the arm to see how many people agreed and were pissed off. But I literally heard some people say, "Oh, I didn't even know that we could vote no," because their unions aren't even really telling them where the votes are happening and this kind of thing. People want to fight, but there always needs to be somebody to get it started. So, okay, so women's leadership, but to lead us to where? And another thing about labor is it's not to go knocking on the Democrats' door. And I want to talk a little bit about that. Imagine if we could flex our own power instead of begging the Democrats and elected officials to throw us some crumbs. Our unions are automatic Democratic Party boosters, and usually without any input from members, and almost pretty much always without really any justification for putting our hard-earned money toward the Democratic Party. What do we get in return? And I think, a couple of good examples are Biden broke the most promising strike we've seen in decades and maybe ever in the railroad industry in 2022. He could have been saying that for the good of railroad safety, even he could have said for the good of the country, we need a quality railroad network. So pay these people. They're short staffed and they work in obscenely dangerous conditions. But he didn't. He intervened and he broke the strike and then actually introduced laws that made striking even harder and sometimes illegal in the railroad industry. So thanks, Union Joe. Another example of, the Democrats just not showing leadership, Cory Booker's recent, filibuster, this huge stand against Trump. 2 days after that, he voted to give arms to Israel. So it was grandstanding and it wasn't leadership. It was all words and it really had no substance. So with a track record like that, again, I think it's really, important for our movement to be talking about labor breaking with the Democrats. And interestingly, the head of the American Federation of Teachers, Randi Weingarten, has recently resigned her position on the Democratic National Committee. She must have been hearing from her rank and file members. So that's a good thing. But I think, we could be talking about an independent labor party that's really, with heavy union involvement at the direction of rank and file workers. That's another, thing that we can be talking about. But a general strike. So if we can't rely on the Democrats and if we can't really get what we need by working in the system, then I guess we have to take power into our own hands. Our mass protests that have been happening this year are really, really critical, and they're very inspiring and important. But so far, they're really more of an illustration of what power we have. And the next step is to actually wield that power. And of course, as labor people, we know that our greatest power is to hit where it hurts. Nas said this in the beginning, get to their profits. So in a strike, we withhold our labor and the bosses don't make their profit. It's a basic and logical tactic. In a general strike, it's on a bigger scale and it involves, multiple industries, and they're public and private, and from transportation to finance. And ideally, it might be started by a union, but it expands to a majority of workers, unionized or not. And you get students involved and you get unemployed people involved and the community gets involved. This is not a pipe dream. It can be done and it has been done recently around the world, in Asia, in Europe, and the Caribbean. And in the US, there have been multiple general strikes. We just don't hear much about them from, the mainstream sources. There have even been calls for general strikes recently. And I am really proud to say that we've just had two radical women sisters at the Washington State Labor Council convention fighting for support of a resolution to organize a general strike right now. So it's happening. We just gotta all catch up. People are leading. Um, why women are key to a general strike, of course, as I've kind of said, because our experience and our vision, and because of our historic willingness and need to fight, internationally, women have reason to fight back in the workplace and outside of work. Women are being killed by bombs and bullets and facing discrimination in every institution and facing restrictive laws and either forced sterilization or no access to abortion. Our physical and economic destinies are more and more in the crosshairs of the capitalist state, and women are not taking it lying down. Who has a better idea of what's wrong with the whole system and society than the ones on the bottom? So, what would be the end goal? Well, a walkout could spiral into a lot of things, including in the Russian Revolution, it spiraled into a struggle for workers' power, like not just winning some gains, but actually taking over the state. General strikes in the United States that have happened, especially the ones in the 30s, led to the birth of the modern labor movement. They can really move mountains. So, if we demonstrate our power, we show our numbers and our willingness to stand up, and we give our class confidence in one another. Working and poor women, women of color, queer folks, immigrant women, as I've said, have nothing to lose. Plus, let's face it, we have the ability to run things. We aren't dependent on management or a ruling class. We're the ones that turn the wrenches and fix the equipment and write the copy and grow the food. And please insert, all the hard work that you've done. We're the ones that do that. We can fight and we can certainly run society. The point of a general strike is to beat back these attacks right now, show courage in the face of creeping fascism, and really go on the offensive with broad, inclusive, multi issue demands. We've got to be bold. And why wouldn't we be? They're afraid of us. There are so many more of us than that thin ruling class. I always see it up here. It's a tiny little thin ruling class we can punch right through. They can absorb a movement here or there, or some pitiful reform that they're going to take back as soon as they can anyway. But what really scares them is when we rise up and we call for the most militant demands, we show them that we're very clear that the whole system has got to go. So I think that's a great idea. I say go for the whole kit and caboodle and get rid of capitalism and bring in the opposite of capitalism, which would be socialist feminism. It could be run democratically for the good of the majority and with all of us sharing in the resources. So nuts and bolts, what do? We can, get involved in our unions, bring resolutions, as I mentioned. There's a resolution we can share, a similar one to what our radical women sisters are presenting. So we can share that. Get in your union meetings and say we need to have, workshops to defend our rights and defend immigrants and know what our rights are. Fight for the idea of independence from the Democrats. That rank and file pressure, again, pressure from below is what moves mountains. It creates the independence to open doors to genuine worker input and workers' priorities. And, the very call, we can talk about it, but, the very call for a Labor Party, something independent of the Democrats, would put the capitalists and the union bureaucrats both on notice. Fight for union democracy, fight for rank and file control of the priorities of your local, and find somebody else who agrees with this and fight together, because alone, of course, we're not very powerful, but together we are. So that's mostly what I wanted to say, but I just wanted to end by hopefully some people maybe haven't heard of, well, hopefully you've heard of the Atlanta washerwomen strike in 1881, but if you haven't, go look it up. In 1881, not even 20 years after the formal end of slavery, Black women mostly had to work as washerwomen, doing laundry in individual houses. It was brutal conditions. Sometimes they didn't even get paid, depending on the household. 20 Black women walked off the job. They said they were forming a union. They called it the Washing Society, and they demanded $1 per dozen pounds of clothes. They timed this with the International Cotton Expo. They went door to door to recruit more women into the union and to join the strike. There was no business agent. There was no local or national union to help them. The city tried to fine them, and they decided to pay the fine so that they could still control laundry in Atlanta. And finally, that strike energy spread to other workers like hotel workers. The city caved, they waived the fee, and the women had made some really important gains for themselves and other low paid workers in Atlanta. So, under those conditions, if they can do it, I think we can do it too. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy. Also, I mean, maybe I'll wait until Gina turns off the recording before I say this comment, but